Welcome back to Season 5 of Legally Uncensored. I'm your host, Demetria Graves, a licensed family law attorney based in California. Our podcast is dedicated to providing essential tools and knowledge for navigating the complexities of family law. We engage in uncensored conversations to shed light on challenging subjects, empowering our listeners with insights for healthier future relationships and proactive divorce strategies. Every season, we strive to offer a deeper approach to divorce, recognizing that legal matters are just one aspect of the journey. This season, we are making sure you understand the basics in the complex world of divorce. Our podcast is your guide to a new beginning and new future. So, thanks for tuning in, and make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, and follow us on all socials. And also, more information is available to you at www.legallyuncensored.com. Today, we're exploring the fundamentals of family law and the importance of selecting the right family law attorney for you and your situation. We'll discuss what factors can make for a smoother experience in the legal process and with your counsel. Joining us today is my friend and fellow family law attorney and certified family law specialist, Leena S. Shinar. I just learned what her middle name was today, too. Just FYI. Leena Shinar is a seasoned family law attorney with years of experience in her field. She began her career at the Los Angeles family law firm Walser and Melcher, where she practiced for over 10 years and became a partner before starting her own law firm. In addition to her practice, Leena spends time volunteering to further advance the family law community. She is the past chair of the family law section of the California Lawyers Association. She spends significant time reviewing and commenting on family law legislation, as well as planning continuing legal education programs to help educate other attorneys in the field of family law. Leena also volunteers with the Daily Settlement Officer Program through the Los Angeles Superior Court, helping litigants try and settle their family law disputes. She is currently the vice president of Levitt Quinn, a nonprofit organization that provides low-cost pro bono legal services to low-income families. Please welcome my friend, Leena Shinar, to the Legally Uncensored podcast. Yay! Hi,
Thank you, Demetria. Hi.
You're very, very welcome. So I want to get right into it, right? Because both of us have a lot of consulting calls on a regular basis. And a lot of times, the first thing I hear is, I've never been through this before. What do I do? So before clients even call us, what are some things they can do to prepare to have the consult call?
I think one of the things clients can do is think about what they're looking for in an attorney. Like, do you want somebody who's a solo practitioner? Do you want somebody who works at a big firm? What type of personality are you looking for? Do you have a gender preference? These are things people can sort of think about before they come in for the initial consult or initial call. And then once they're on, and another thing that they can do is sort of think about what their end goals are for the divorce process. Do they want custody of their children? Do they want a specific, time with their children? Do they need money right away and they won't have access to it once the divorce process starts? What kinds of things are they looking for? That's what I always ask my potential new clients when they come in. What are your goals? What do you want to see happen? And that also helps me as a family law attorney understand whether I'm the right fit for these people and whether I can help them achieve those goals, or whether I need to have a real conversation with them in the initial consult by telling them their expectations are unrealistic and they need to sort of either look somewhere else if I'm not what they're looking for, or they need to kind of temper their expectations.
How do you address communication with clients? Because I know initially when they start, some are, a little more needy than others, and they want to talk all the time, text all the time, on the weekends. What is some advice you may give those who want to talk to us all the time?
I would say at the outset, your attorneys should be telling you this. And so maybe in the initial consult, ask them about their style of communication. Ask them when they're available. Ask them if they're going to respond to emails over the weekend or calls over the weekend and things like that. So you both have good expectations about each other. I don't generally respond to emails over the weekend. I don't give out my personal cell phone number for clients because at the end of the day, we are also working a job, right? This is our job, and we have families and obligations and things like that. So we also have to be cognizant of those things. So I would say when you go into consult, set those expectations in your first initial meeting. And so that you as the client know what to expect, and we as the attorneys are knowing what to expect from you as a client.
And I also say be open, because sometimes what you think you need in an attorney is not something you may actually need. So I think it's important to interview a couple of attorneys to make sure you're making the right decision for you, and to most definitely follow your intuition. Does this feel right? Is this a good fit? Because I know I do. And most of us attorneys do not take everyone that calls us. So that also means that you, as a potential client, don't have to sign up with the first attorney you speak to.
Right. I want you to be happy as my client. I want you to feel like you have picked the right person for you. And so what I always tell potentials when they call is you should feel comfortable talking to the person who's your attorney, because you are going to be spending a lot of time on the phone with them, a lot of time probably in person with them. So it has to be somebody that you get along with and someone that you trust. And so if you get into that initial meeting with somebody and you're sort of like, I'm not sure, but my friends are all telling me this person is good, but I don't really know, don't choose that person. Go with somebody who you feel comfortable with.
And I also say be careful with someone that's overpromising, or that seems that they're too busy, or whatever the red flags you see in the beginning, they're only going to intensify. So, especially in family court, we don't know for the most part what judges are going to do. So anyone that's overpromising, that to me sometimes is a red flag. We can tell you generally what we see, what we can expect, what we have experienced, but we cannot guarantee anything is going to happen.
Yeah, your attorney, whoever you're interviewing, should always be honest with you. And if you feel like they are just supporting your cause 100%, that's kind of a red flag, unfortunately, because it means that they're not telling you that you could go into court and absolutely lose, even if everything that you want to fight for is correct and
Right.
you are morally in the right and everything is on your side. It doesn't matter. And so you should always feel that somebody who tells you, hey, I don't really know if this is going to work for you, that's somebody who's being honest with you.
Right.
And it's something to look for in an attorney. Definitely.
Absolutely.
Because I'm sure Demetria can also attest to this. When we are in court, we know, we can see when cases are going on in front of us, the attorneys who have overpromised to their clients. It is very obvious to all of us. We have a lot of cases like that where we know opposing counsel has overpromised to their client and they have completely unrealistic expectations. And it can't just be the client. It has to be that their attorney also told them, hey, you can get all these things, when we know they can't.
And what I've unfortunately seen in those cases, sometimes clients spend $20,000 based on these promises, only to come back to one of us to kind of fix what was overpromised. So it's really important to pay attention what is said, what is promised, what is discussed in those meetings. But before we even get to a meeting, right? Before someone even calls Leena, what would be the perfect thing you would tell clients to do to prepare for that meeting with you?
understand, if you have access, what your finances look like, what assets you own, what debts are out there in your name or in your spouse's name. Sort of understand what the big picture looks like. And I know that that's not possible for everyone, but to the extent it is possible, do your homework. Figure all of that stuff out when you come in. Make a list of questions that you want to ask a potential attorney, things that will make or break your relationship with an attorney, right? Talk to your friends who have gone through a divorce and see what the process looks like. Do a little research. I mean, all you have to do is Google like California divorce, and there's going to be a million things that pop up and educational stuff. And I'm not saying you have to overdo it, but just so you get a general idea about how the process works, it's helpful. Or, make sure to ask that question in your first meeting. And if you have kids, think about what your ideal parenting schedule looks like for you, whether that is realistic or unrealistic. And in my mind, take stock of whether your spouse is a good parent or whether you feel justified in asking for more parenting time than your spouse. And I don't mean, they don't, they let the kids eat cereal in the morning instead of having a nutritious breakfast. I don't mean stuff like that. I mean, if you have serious concerns. And also if there are any, custody issues or domestic violence issues or whatever, take notes. Make sure you have all your facts in order before you go in and interview an attorney, so you can really lay out your situation for them and see what their feedback is when you go in to meet with them.
And don't be surprised or alarmed. Most of us charge for our consultations. The fees can vary. Sometimes they can be $50 on up to an hour of our time. And I think a lot of us do this, and I can probably speak for Leena when I say, when we're taking time away from other cases to speak to you, that costs money. And so both of us have young children. So there's a very limited time during the day when we can do what we need to do. So most attorneys do charge for their consultations. Some still do free, but don't be surprised if you're charged for their time. A lot of times, Leena, people come and say, I just feel so lost, right? So I like to give a practical sense of how this is going to go and a legal kind of roadmap for how this is going to go before we get to the legal questions, right? Because I'm just going to ask you the questions I always hear in my consultations, but I think it's important that you have to think about the practical side of this too. So if this goes forward, what does custody and visitation look like until this process begins? Are you going to stay in the same house? Is someone leaving? Kind of what does that look like? And if you're not the earning spouse, will you have access to the resources that you need? So kind of how do you walk your potential clients through that practical consideration?
I ask them all those questions. It's sort of like, what do you see happening? Are you going to have access to money? If you don't have access to money, maybe get access to money before, you let your spouse know that you're filing for this divorce. How is your spouse going to react? So we sort of develop a plan for how to introduce the divorce to them. Sometimes it's, hey, if you guys are in therapy already, maybe you discuss this during your therapy session with a third party involved so that it doesn't come as such a shock. And so there isn't a ton of blowback. So I have these types of conversations with my clients. And I think, we as family law attorneys, we don't know your spouse. You know your spouse the best. So you have to provide us with the information about how you believe this is going to go so that we can then sort of cater our advice accordingly. And I did just want to comment on something else Demetria said. It's not just our time you're paying for in a consult, but it's our advice. It's our actual legal expertise. And if you have an initial consult with us, we are giving you legal advice. And that's our job, right? So that's what you're paying for, not just our time. But anyway, back to the practical considerations. I think a lot of people going into divorce are just very emotional and they just want to start the process and get moving. But once the train starts moving, you can't pull it back. It's very hard to get back and then say, oh my God, I gotta like get money. I need a bank account. I don't know where our tax returns are. Like that's all very hard to do after the train started moving. So the more we can sort of go over with the potential clients, kind of checking off all the boxes, the better. So I think spouse's personality is a big first question that I ask, and then sort of advice flows from there.
And I say also, it's a marathon, not a sprint. A lot of people want to come in today and be divorced next month. I'm like, it's just not going to go that way. There are other considerations, mediation, private judging that you can consider that may be a little faster. But unfortunately, especially where we are in Los Angeles County, it is going to take some time. And I'm going to jump into some of the questions, but the number one question I'll probably always get is how long is it going to take? So how do you answer that question?
I say, I can't tell you. It depends on a lot of factors, right? What type of personality your spouse has, whether or not they want a divorce, who they hire as their attorney, because that makes a huge difference in how the process goes. How quickly you, the client, want to get a divorce, whether there's going to be initial custody issues, which sort of take over the entire process and can drag out for months and months and months. So all of these different factors sort of play into it. So it could take as short as a couple of months if everybody agrees on everything and all we have to do is draft up, the basic legal documentation and we're done. But if there's any conflict at all, it could take more than a year. And that's usually what I tell people when they come in. That 6-month period that everybody always references when they come in for a consultation is really the minimum that it will take for a divorce. Usually even in super agreeable, everybody's amicable, they just want to get a divorce, it will take at least 6 months to get everything done.
The other big one is how much is this going to cost me?
I say, I can't tell you. It is very hard to guesstimate attorney's fees, and that is also codependent on all of those other things that I just talked about. So if you have a very difficult opposing counsel on the other side, you're going to have to spend fees, and probably an extraordinary amount of fees. And this is just, I had a case that was very heavily litigated, heavily, like we were in court every month. And it was each party spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on fees because they were fighting about custody, they were fighting about money, they were fighting about their house. I mean, anything and everything that they could fight about. But it wasn't my client. It was the other side and their attorney who wanted to fight about everything. So I'm sure that you as the client may think everything's great and you just want to get it all done with. And I can tell you, hey, it's going to be done in $5,000 or whatever. But that would be totally false if your spouse hires somebody who's very difficult. And so telling somebody that up front creates a bad situation wherein I promise something that I can't really fulfill because it's not really my promise to make.
And that brings up a great point that some attorneys are focused on driving up, are investing in the litigation because of the fees. And I think you all should be mindful of that. Everyone is not here, like Leena and myself, to kind of help you through the process, but sometimes that is a strategy to drive up the fees, to increase, their bottom line. So that's definitely something to think about. Which brings me to my next question I get is, I've never been through this. What is the process like?
So I tend to give potential new clients an overview, big picture overview. First, you file a petition, your spouse files a response, everything gets served. We then work on disclosures, and then it's time for settlement or judgment, right? Financial disclosures, that's what I mean. And I tell them there's like a temporary period, which is from the date of filing to the date of judgment. And post-judgment is kind of what I refer to as the permanent period, right? For permanent support. That's not really always permanent, but that's what I call it. So I tell them during the temporary period, after the petition and response is done, We can serve discovery, which means asking the other side questions about things you need more information about, assets you need more information about. Discovery includes depositions or written questions. And the temporary period also includes the ability to ask for temporary orders. And that's when you ask for temporary spousal support, child support, a parenting plan, and things like that. The less litigation you want to do during the temporary period and the less negotiation you have to do during the temporary period means that the case probably moves a little bit faster. So you can probably get to the final judgment phase a little bit quicker. And yeah, that's kind of the big picture overview, right? And then there's permanent support, which goes from the time of judgment until whenever you guys decide it's going to end, or it goes on forever. And all of that can be negotiated or litigated. I don't really talk too much about mediation and trial in that big picture overview unless they specifically ask me about it.
In the beginning of a case, do you ever recommend that a couple considers mediation? I say that because some couples are so amicable. I will say, have you all thought about mediation as an alternative to litigation?
So I do, and I sort of approach people like that in a way where I can still assist them, but I would not be representing them. So I say I do consulting with mediation. You can still ask me all your questions, but it sort of sounds like you guys have it all figured out. Mm-hmm. So here's a list of mediators if you want to go that direction, because I think you'll be better off that way. Mm-hmm. And so that's in a way very much in the sense of, what am I trying to say? It's cost savings to you as the client to go through the mediation process rather than hiring me as your attorney and sort of having me work on everything and do everything for you. It definitely saves a lot of costs. And so I think if you're amicable, consider that route. The mediator can do everything for you. Attorney mediators can. And I always tell people, those people are very skilled at their jobs. They specialize in mediation. This is what they do instead of litigation like us. So going to talk to them about these issues is going to be a lot easier.
What is your thought on paralegals preparing the documentation without having a consult with one of us?
I think that there are a lot of very skilled paralegals out there. That being said, I think there are attorneys for a reason. Mm-hmm. And there are things that we look for or know of, or expertise that we have that maybe a paralegal would not have. And so I think for a very simple situation, where there's no spousal support, no custody issues, no child support. Yeah, sure. Could a paralegal fill out the paperwork? Absolutely. But I wouldn't feel comfortable recommending that to somebody who came in to consult with me. I would always tell them to have an attorney prepare their paperwork, or to consult with an attorney and they can prepare the paperwork on their own, just so that they have a second set of eyes on it.
Right. I think I agree with you. At least talk to someone so you kind of know what your rights are and know what you're doing before you have someone actually prepare that documentation. Now I'm going to ask you some of the questions I get and people get so upset with me. I think number one being,
this should be fun.
My spouse cheated. Why should I have to pay them spousal support? Or I don't want to pay them spousal support, or I'm not going to pay them spousal support. Some variation of that.
This is something we hear a lot. And it's not even if the spouse cheated. Sometimes it is just, I am not paying this person spousal support because they are a terrible person, right? I will very clearly tell you in an initial consult that if you make more money, you're going to pay spousal support, and there is nothing I can do about that. And if you then don't want to hire me, that is your decision. But California is a no-fault state. The court doesn't care if somebody cheated. The court doesn't care if someone killed your cat. I mean, they just don't care. So if you make more money, you're going to pay spousal support, and there's no way to get out of it.
I've had people cry and cry and cry, and I'm like, I wish I can help, but there's nothing that I can do about it. And sometimes
And
I
this is
feel
something,
bad, but I can't.
yeah, look, the law is what it is. Demetria and I have no control over what the law is. So there's not much we can do to help, even if we wanted to, which generally I don't necessarily feel as much empathy as you do, but it's just the law. It's just the law.
Another one is that's my house. I pay the mortgage. Why do I have to share the equity with my spouse?
So another part of that maybe big picture discussion that I have in a different context is the difference between community property and separate property, and sort of a, you know, brief overview with potential clients that anything you do during the marriage is community property, unless it is traceable to a separate property source, which is something that you had prior to marriage or something that you got after separation or something that somebody gifted you during the marriage, which we can trace back to a gift that was only to you, or maybe an inheritance or something like that. So if you were earning money during the marriage, that's community. And if that money paid for the mortgage on your house, that's community. And Demetria can probably agree with this, but I see this time and time and time again. I am the only one who paid for the mortgage. It was my income that paid for the mortgage. I'm the one who worked for the mortgage. That's maybe absolutely factually accurate, but unfortunately, a lot of people don't have prenups, which is fine, but they also don't get any advice before you get married, right? So when people go to get a divorce, they don't know that even if they kept all of their income separate during marriage, doesn't matter. It's still community property. It still gets divided with your spouse.
Yeah, people like to scream about that as well. And then I always say, is there a prenup? No. I don't know about you, but in my 19 years, I've only had a few people that had prenups and were willing to stick by the terms of their prenup.
Yeah, I think in the overall picture of my career, most people don't have premarital agreements. And most people don't get any legal advice before you get married because that's not what you're looking for. You're happy, you want to get married, like it's all great until it's not great anymore. And then we have to figure out how to clean up the mess that's essentially there. But we as attorneys are sort of bound by the confines of the law. And if the law doesn't say that we can do this, then we have no control over it. It's not our fault. And it's not your fault either as the potential client, but unfortunately, it is what it is.
The same is true for retirement accounts. Why do they get access to my retirement account? And I think it's a lot of what you said about the residence. If you're putting money in during the marriage, I think a lot of people have a hard time understanding that their income is community property.
Absolutely. And that is why people should get prenups. If they want to keep their assets separate during the marriage, not a plug for a prenup, but just it's good to get that advice before you get married. And I do find though that clients often feel better when you do explain to them that if the account existed prior to marriage and there were contributions made during that period before you were married, then the account itself is allocated between community and separate property. It's not just that it completely is community property. And then that often helps people at least feel that their separate property is taken into account when dividing that retirement account.
Do you find there's a difference, or do you litigate high net worth divorces different than an average divorce?
I would say that sometimes the issues are a little more complicated, but and sometimes there's a prenup involved, right? Or there's a business involved, or there's some like more complicated issue. But in terms of approaching the case, no, I always approach it sort of in the same way. I would say, 90% of my cases settle because even if we litigate in the beginning, I sort of drive the clients towards settlement because that's going to be way cheaper for them than going to trial, right? So maybe the only difference is, you would get a forensic accountant involved very quickly early on in the case. Whereas for maybe a more average case, you'd only use a forensic for very specific tasks. And maybe you can do that later on in the case, like dividing the retirement accounts or, doing a community property balance sheet or something like that. But you can definitely get more experts involved if the high net worth people have money and they want to do the litigation.
Right. What are some challenges or obstacles that you see that people might not expect in the divorce process?
I think a lot of people do not realize how emotionally taxing it is. They just want to be done with the process. They want to be done with the marriage, but there's a lot of hoops to jump through to be done with the marriage. And I don't think people always understand how rough that's going to be on them. So I often tell people in an initial consult that they should be seeking out a therapist and talking to a therapist because, like you said, this is a marathon, not a sprint. Mm-hmm. And people think it's going to be over in 6 months and they can move on with their lives and do everything. And sometimes it takes years to get a divorce. And so you have to be mentally strong and mentally prepared for that. And that is very often an issue that comes up with clients where I have to say, I know you want to be done with this. I know you're frustrated, but, and another thing is that I don't think clients understand that anytime they want something, their spouse is going to say no to it no matter what it is. So the best way to sort of proceed through the divorce, in my opinion, is just to be very even about everything, very blasé. And if we can get you the stuff that you want, great, we're going to do that. But fighting about it and sort of making your positions known in the beginning is not always the best way to go. Because your spouse, no matter what, it's something bizarre and psychological. As soon as one person says they want the house, then the other person's going to say, absolutely not, we must sell the house. Right. So you gotta just be easy about it, which I don't think people sort of understand in the beginning. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, you made a point about encouraging your clients to settlement. And a lot of times I think we all watch too much TV and everyone has this ideal that they want their day in court, whatever that looks like to them. And I have to remind my clients often, a lot of times judges have several matters on calendar. They don't really care to go into the details of why you hate them so much, what they did to you. So what people really perceive as their day in court is not going to happen. And I think there's something to be said about being able to get in a room and talk about what your needs are, what you want to see happen, and kind of control that narrative rather than a judge telling you what you're going to do. And I think that is the biggest benefit to that. You kind of control the outcome of this sometimes mess rather than not knowing, because you don't know once you go in front of the court what's going to happen.
No matter what happens, you are always going to feel better if you made a decision rather than somebody else making a decision for you. Even if the decision that you make is not perfect in your ideal universe. Right. And listen, the one thing we always overlook is that a mediator will listen to you. Mm-hmm. A mediator will let you tell your story. You can tell all the information about your spouse and why they're terrible people. And they will hear it. And sometimes people need that sort of release, right? And it's way better with a mediator than it is in front of a judge.
Agreed. And
because a judge has 5 minutes to hear your case, basically, like maybe 30 minutes on a good day. Right. But a mediator partitions off, sections off their whole day for you.
Right.
So you can talk as much as you want and they will listen to all of it.
Well, sometimes you might start with a judge and have 3 different judges on the course of your case. So there's that as well. And then you said something about emotions, and this is something I also talk about in my practical speech when I'm talking to potentials. We are not licensed therapists. We care about what's happening. We support you, but we are not equipped to deal with that emotional setback or what you're feeling during this process. So yes, you can call us, but we're charging you probably a lot more than a therapist or a trusted advisor might charge. I think there's something to be said to have someone to talk to outside of your attorney when those feelings come up.
I think every divorcing party should have a therapist that they are going to speak with, because no matter how you slice it, it's going to be more expensive with an attorney than it is with a therapist. And at the end of the day, like Demetria said, we're not trained, but yes, we know how to deal with certain personalities. And yes, we all have experience with personality disorders and things like that. But we're not going to be able to help you as the client deal with it.
Right.
You know, we can do it from a legal strategy perspective and sort of how to make that work. But for you, when you go home at night and the things that are running through your head, we're not going to be able to help with that. And I feel like a lot of clients are often surprised at their bills because they have called us so much, and, you know, we have to bill for our time. That's how we earn a living. And they seem shocked by it. So a good thing, if you meet with a good attorney and you're going through some significant emotional trauma, or even not, they will probably tell you you should get a therapist.
Or not, and just keep billing you time and time again for calling them and speaking about the issue. But I think it's very, very important to separate the two. I know it's hard, and I know it's, you know, a lot of clients think we get it, we understand what's going on. So they want to keep talking to us, and I respect it. But I think having someone trained to walk you through this, give you the tools that sometimes we might not have, to me is way more beneficial to the client.
Yeah, it will help you in the long run to have this third party to speak to. Our knowledge is limited. I hate to say that, you know, of course, we want to be providing all services for our clients, but we just are not trained in that.
So what do you tell someone that needs to modify, or before we even get to modification, because I had a very, very interesting case where something very important wasn't put in the final orders after they mediated final judgment. So what is important to make sure you cover in a final order or judgment or agreement?
So I would say, first off, don't rush your attorney. Don't say, we got to get this done in 1 second. It's got to be done today, because that's when we miss stuff. Right. And so there is specific language that we need to include if there's a custody order, and if it's a final custody order, or, you know, regarding taxes and how you guys are going to deal with your taxes, or whether you're equalizing payments if one is paying the other cash is non-taxable. There's certain magic language that needs to be included in the judgments. So I think that in order to make sure that your attorney is doing all that, you got to give them a little bit of time, because these things take a long time to draft. I also, what I do is I send you, the client, the judgment. To review. And maybe you're not going to know the magic language, and that's okay. I don't expect you to. But you are responsible at the end of the day for making sure that everything you want in there in terms of the, you know, the custody orders, the division of property, the support, that everything in there is correct. Because at the end of the day, you're the one who's going to be impacted by it. So I always send clients everything to review before I send it to opposing counsel. And just remember that if opposing counsel makes a ton of changes and has a bunch of revisions or typos or whatever, that's not abnormal.
Right.
That's totally fine. That doesn't mean your attorney's not doing their job. It just means that one person cannot, you know, check all the boxes sometimes. And that's what we have both sides for, is so that there's so many sets of eyes looking at this agreement to make sure everybody's protected in the process.
So as we're wrapping up, what are maybe your 3 biggest tips for someone that's starting the divorce journey? What would you say?
Top tip, make sure that you have access to money, I think, before you even start walking down this path. Make sure that that is secure. Have a rainy day fund. Have something that you've got in your back pocket. So in the event you start down this process, you're not left out in the cold, because we cannot file a motion for spousal support quickly enough to help you. And there isn't really much your lawyer can do about that. So that's number one. Number two is, you touched on this in the beginning, but interview several attorneys to see who your best fit is. And go with the attorney who doesn't necessarily have all of the accolades and isn't recommended by 7 million people, but that you feel comfortable with. And that when you interview them, you feel good, you feel like protected, and this person is going to be honest with you. That's really super important. And third, I would say, have a therapist or a trusted friend. Let's say therapy is not in the cards, you can't afford a therapist, whatever it is. But have somebody who you can discuss these feelings, emotions, and they can help you come up with strategies to cope with those feelings. Not just somebody who's going to listen to you, right? Because I can listen to you, Demetria can listen to you. But this person has to give you tools. And that's sort of your most important thing, because it's a marathon and you got to have the tools to be able to deal with it in your toolbox, right? And especially if you're in litigation, that is, of the utmost importance, is to be able to deal with all of the things that are thrown at you that are unexpected.
Leena, that's a perfect way to kind of end the show, but I think it's very important to hear from other people other than myself to get a different perspective on the process. That's also in the field, someone I trust and love so dearly. It's important for people to understand that I'm just not making this stuff up, that it's a thing. So I really, really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your insight with us. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome.
I really appreciate it.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Legally Uncensored. Remember, navigating family law matters can be challenging, but with the right knowledge and support, you can make informed decisions and move forward with confidence. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast for more insightful discussions on family law and relationships. Until next time, I am Demetria Graves. Thank you for listening.